Again, for another couple of minutes, just first focusing on our breath to settle our minds, and then we'll reset our motivation. So first of all, just taking a few minutes to focus on the sensations of breathing in our body, whether in our abdomen or our chest rising and falling, or perhaps the sensation in our nostrils. And then thinking that by learning about karma, by learning these details, we'll be able to bring more awareness to our actions of body, speech, and mind, thereby being of more benefit to other beings. We're influencing others, whether we're aware of it or not, whether we intend to or not. So by setting an example, your own awareness of our actions of body, speech, and mind, may you be of most benefit to all other beings. So before we took our lunch break, we were looking at these 4 components of a karmic action. And so you can see not any one of these components is actually sort of the ultimate result of our action in terms of how much benefit does it have kind of downstream. And as I said, a lot of times we can do something with the best intention, with as much as possible, a motivation of compassion, and it may not have the result that we seek, the result that we wish for. It might backfire even, but for us, that's going to be a positive action because of our intention, right? So sometimes I think when we get involved in Buddhism, we can get a little bit paralyzed, and we can think, oh, well, I don't know, what's going to happen. I'm going to take action, and kind of 3 steps down the line, what's going to be the ultimate result. But I think applying whatever wisdom we have at our disposal and really checking our motivation is sort of the best that we can do, because we can't wait until we have perfect compassion and wisdom. We need to engage in these actions in order to create the causes for, right, that positive energy that we need, that spiritual momentum. Sometimes we use these words like merit and virtue. I have a friend who's a Buddhist teacher, and he likes to translate this as spiritual momentum, and I like that. It kind of gives us that driving force. We can't wait until we're perfect. But there's no way we actually get the positive energy that we need for our practices to kind of keep evolving. So that's part of it. So that's what I was saying, understanding these 4 components and just being mindful when we're engaging in our actions and checking, because it's not always obvious, oh, that's a purely negative action, that's a purely positive action. Sometimes it's not always so clear, but especially really thinking about what is our intention going into that action, into that situation. So were there any more questions about these four in terms of just trying to kind of be clear about the four components. Yeah.
You mentioned that, the example of stepping on an ant.
Yeah.
And if you don't have one of those, you don't accumulate any negative.
Thank you. No, that's not true. You don't get the full karmic result of killing. So killing has a very specific karmic result. So yeah, it doesn't mean the hunter intending to shoot the deer that misses and doesn't kill it gets off scot-free either, right? But it's just the fullest extent of that killing karma, which has a very specific karmic result, that won't be fulfilled. But it doesn't mean that if any components are missing, it's just nothing either, right? Yeah.
Oh.
Well, you just have
when you were walking, right, and you stepped on you still gain negative karma. The only person who, and this is why they wouldn't get negative karma, is because an omniscient being would know that was there and would know to avoid that, even if it wasn't in their view. They could be blindfolded and they would still shift their foot.
That's true. And also, we say, and this gets interesting, and we'll get into this tomorrow, without any obscuring affliction at all, without any ignorance about the nature of reality, we say that ignorance, and we'll look at this when we look at the 12 links too, is an extra force that allows that karma to ripen to its fullest extent. So even a being who has a bunch of karmic seeds, if their ignorance is wiped out, they're never going to experience the result of that karma, because ignorance is needed as sort of a catalyst for our negative karma to ripen. But you're right about an omniscient being too. I mean, there's nothing that is outside of their awareness. Nothing, right, is unrecognized, right? We say that's one of the qualities, But this is necessary for it to be negative karma. So somebody who's eliminated that ignorance completely, that's why we say that they can no longer create new negative karma. This is, they're not going to mistakenly think that a negative action is going to bring them any kind of happiness. They can no longer create new negative karma. And it's because of many factors, including no more ignorance at all. They wouldn't have the intention to engage in some sort of a negative action thinking it's going to bring them happiness. That ignorance about reality is just gone. They're like, why would I do that? That's just stupid. That's just going to create suffering. The grasping after the object of attachment, thinking it's going to bring them happiness. They'd be like, I know my happiness doesn't exist out there. Why would I do something stupid to get that thing that it's like that's just gone. Yeah. So there's a couple of things going on there, that would make it so that they can't create any more new negative karma. Yeah. Any other questions about what we've talked about so far, this list of 4 components? Okay. Yes?
I know I wasn't here, but just on this comment about, omniscience, in my understanding, it's not like I'm going to know every little thing that's there. There are bacteria in our body. They're going to die when we have certain normal physiological actions. But certainly, because when we're in a human body, then samsara is happening.
Yes. Yeah.
And that involves our life over another thing's life. It may be bacteria in our gut. It may be, something on the side of our nose. It could be anything.
Yeah.
So the actual knowledge of damage to another sentient being doesn't necessarily, will that still will karma still be creating even if I have view, but I still am in a human form?
Well, that's why I said eliminating the ignorance, and we'll look at that later when we look at the 12 links, because the ignorance is a necessary factor that would cause that karma to ripen into an unpleasant. And that's actually the philosophical difference between Buddhism and the Jain tradition, right? The Jain tradition says, very close to Buddhism, probably of all the world religions and philosophies, the closest, lots of similarity. But in the Jain tradition, this Indian tradition, there's the view that you, in order to be liberated, you need to not only not create any new negative karma, but experience the results of all of the old negative karma. So, I mean, beautiful religion ethically. They are extremely careful. Like the Jain monastics wear a mask so they won't accidentally breathe in an insect, sweep the ground before they walk so they won't accidentally step on an insect. But in Buddhism, we don't have that view. We say, yes, of course, in a human body, you're going to step on a bug. You don't have to go to that extreme because there's other factors that prevent that from being a negative karma that you have to experience. For one thing, we can purify it. For another thing, you get a high enough level of realization that that will not ripen into, it's not a question of exhausting all of our old karma through having to experience and scrupulously never creating even any new accidental killing karma. So that would be the difference between those two philosophies. Yeah.
I'm hoping not to complicate things anymore. But I had a question about how taking refuge features into the impact of creating karma, ripening karma. Like, let's say you're about to have a car accident, you call on the 3 jewels, or does that potentially lessen your karma? Does that does that have nothing to do with it?
Well, it's said to be strongly purifying, actually, to take refuge. But the main refuge we're taking is not, oh, Buddha, save me. Get the car to veer off at the last minute, Lord Buddha, my savior. That's not what refuge means. The main refuge is in the path, in the Dharma. So what we're placing our reliance on is the practices that we do that will lead to the end of suffering. So they say often, I have some friends in the Thai forest tradition, and they said there's this thing they call farmer's dharma in Thailand, and it's the farmer saying, please, Lord Buddha, send the rain. And you're praying to the Buddha as if the Buddha is some kind of omnipotent supreme being or something. It doesn't really work like that, right? It's about the real refuge, or what we're placing our trust and faith in, is the techniques. The Dharma is the main kind of refuge, so it doesn't really have this magical kind of effect. However, it's said that by making that shift in our mind and taking refuge, even that has a lot of purificatory, is that a word? You know what I'm saying? Effect, but it's mostly that shift in, okay, I get that this is the way reality works. I'm going to cast my lot with this sort of system as a way to, deal with my suffering through the Four Noble Truths and the path, mostly. Yeah. So sometimes you'll hear these things that sound quite magical, right? But then the fine print is, if you do it perfectly with the pure motivation, yada, yada, yada. You'll hear walking under this mantra that's over the doorway. Well, like I say, the fine print is, your mind has to be completely pure with a certain motivation. It's not like these things work like magic. Unfortunately, it's not like
But
that.
it appears to be sometimes. If you've accumulated that much pure
Well, that's right.
It could show up in a lifetime and appear to be miraculous.
Yeah, because
I say that because I have that experience, but I don't want to go into details.
and then they say, again, karma can ripen much more quickly if it's very powerful in terms of certain forces. So you can create a very powerful cause in terms of an incredibly pure, strong motivation, or it could be that it's acting somehow as a condition that will enable a karma that's already there to ripen. Your state of mind in that moment can be so powerful, right, that it can be a ripening condition for a karma that might already be there. Yeah. Helena.
want to take the snail of yours to another level.
Well, you know, that's one of the advantages of being a teacher. You get to confess publicly to the most humiliating moment.
I'm curious, the karma is also with the snail. So,
Well, you mean this? Well, the snail had his or her karma. Exactly.
one of the ways I look at things at times, when things are done unintentionally,
Yeah.
and something gets hurt by it, there is a chance that whatever got hurt has a chance to come back in a human form or a different form that allows it to even learn more.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. It could be. It could very well be. I mean, for sure, for that snail being, it was its karma for that snail lifetime to cease the moment my big foot came down, you know. So that's an interesting relationship between me and that being. Like we both were involved in that action. So always with the basis or the object, there's a relationship there with that being. It could be that I liberated that being to a higher realm rebirth. I don't know that at all. And in fact, that gets very interesting when we talk about morality. There have been cases that very highly realized beings have engaged in, very, very highly realized beings, with the power to transfer that being's consciousness to a pure realm in order to liberate that being, have engaged in that action. There's a lot of fine print that goes along with that says, unless you're at that level, don't even think about it, right? Yeah, but there's definitely, in fact, it said, Master Shantideva in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life goes into great detail for many verses about how heavy the negative karma is to do anything that harms a bodhisattva, right? So a being who's devoted their entire existence to benefiting others. Like, example for us, we mostly accept His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Anything you do to harm a being like that, really bad. Then he says, but at least you've created a karmic connection with that being. Even by harming them, you have a connection. Like he goes on and on to say how bad it is, and then he says, but you're hooked at least. And they're going to save you, even if you harm them. Really interesting thing. We say, there's another kind of stanza that comes from Master Shantideva that says, even if you give a crumb of bread to a bird, pray that through the force of that karmic connection you're making with that being, you will lead them to enlightenment. And I love that. They're saying any interaction you have with any being, pray that through the force of that, you're hooked in. I do that. I've mentioned before in, grocery stores, they always wear the name tag, and nobody ever calls them by name. They've got their 8 of, scanning the barcodes. I mean, can you imagine? I've never had a job like that, luckily. I've had other worse jobs. So I always call that person by name, and I go, hey, Susie, how's it going? And they look up. They're so happy. And then in my mind, I don't say it out loud because I look weird enough. They don't want to think I'm even weirder. I'm like, okay, Susie, I got you. We've got, we're connected. Let me lead you to enlightenment. And I make that aspiration every time I connect with someone. Because, hey, if Susie's already an enlightened being, she won't mind that I just promised to lead. That's all right. She'll be happy about that. And that's an interesting way to go through life, is to think we have so many opportunities to connect. And those are the connections that, means that person will show up in our lifetime, even with that small connection. So that snail, when I stepped, I just freaked out. I should have said, okay, I harmed you. Through that action of harm, may we be connected enough that I will lead you to enlightenment, through that. So so we do create the connection with the object, even with an act of harm. We create some sort of a link with that being. And it may be a result of a previous act. That snail stepped on me in a past life, and maybe that's why I stepped on that, that being Yeah, possible that it works like that. Yeah, so it gets kind of interesting.
But you have to be small in this snail.
What do you mean, if I were an amoeba? You have the snail. No, I meant not when he was a
stepped
snail.
on you.
No, I meant he could have been something else in some past life. Maybe he was the human being and I was the snail past life. Or, yeah, I was an amoeba. Possible. Or a bigger snail. Do snails step on each other? Does that work? They just kind of slide over each other. Okay, so anyway, like I said, not always straightforward, but at least we've got some principles to work with. And the point is, this is so important, so don't be paralyzed of thinking, oh, I don't know what the ultimate outcome of my action will be in 10 years' time, therefore I shouldn't act. We have to do our best in the short term, while we're working on our wisdom and trying to figure out what is really the most beneficial, and our wisdom keeps increasing along the path too. Okay, couple more lists. Sorry, it's just the way today is. Yes?
Explain the distinction between basis and object.
Same. I'm just using two terms because basis isn't as clear as object, but it's synonymous. Yeah. That's just the object of that karmic action. Yeah. All right. So, results of karma. So later in this life or in a future life, right, can happen in the future. We've got 4 results of karma. So the fruitional result refers to that a rebirth. So for a complete karma, there can be an entire rebirth that corresponds to that karma. So for example, for a killing karma with all 4 components complete, especially a heavy one, it can determine a lower realm rebirth. That can be one of the results of that karma. But that's not the only result. For a complete karma, then when you are again at some point born as a human, you can also have these other results. The result, 2 results corresponding to the cause. We have the experience that corresponds to the cause, which is what we usually think of when we think of a karmic result, right? You experience something similar to that thing. So the snail stepped on me, I step on the snail. It's like that. What goes around comes around, right? So you have the experience that's similar to that action that you did, right? So that's what we usually think of when we think of a karmic result, don't we? That thing that's similar. That's not the only one, though. The behavior corresponding to the cause. And according to Buddhism, this is the worst. We have the habit to do that action again. So the more I engage in killing karma, not only does it mean that I could experience threats to my life, ill health, right, short lifespan, all of that experience is similar. It's really easy for me to do it again. I have a habit to engage in killing again. Even psychologists say, you cheat on your wife the first time, it's really hard. The second time, easier, right? You've overcome all of that resistance, and it works the same way with karma. So often, and we'll look at this when we look at the karma quiz, when people are looking at the experiences that they're having in their life, and then they figure out what it relates to in the past, it sort of makes sense because they might have a habit of that negative action that they're doing even now, because that's one of the results of karma. And this is the worst according to Buddhism. How come?
Because she's going to keep accumulating.
That's right.
Karma.
This is a result of the past one, and it sets off a whole nother cycle, right? So this is considered to be the worst. If you only ever just experienced what goes around, comes around, and it was finished, then you just be done. Great, But the problem is, and that's why the lady in the blue scarf, what's her name? Annette. When Annette was saying, so, when somebody punches you in the nose, if you don't punch back, then it's finished. You've experienced the result of some past karma. If you don't retaliate, done. But if you retaliate, you just start a whole nother cycle. This friend of mine in Dharamsala, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lives, in India, there's this monsoon season. And if you've never experienced it, it is so intense. You can't even believe it, especially up in the mountains in the Himalayas where it's like entire buckets of water just being dumped on you for 3 months. You know, just completely into, but you have to do stuff. You have to go out, so you're schlepping around when you're wearing robes. I mean, they don't dry for 3.5 months, you know. So one time during the monsoon season, we've got a retreat center up there, Tushita Retreat Centers, and this friend of mine, this nun from New Zealand, was walking up the hill, and another friend, a monk from England, is walking down, and there's this really, really steep hill you have to walk down, and as he's walking down, he slips in the rain and falls, and as he gets up, he goes, "Great, another one down." Okay? Because it was like, great, an experience, done with that one. Now, it doesn't mean you put yourself in this situation. Don't take this to extremes, okay? I have a friend who lives in New York, and he won't park in front of his apartment building if there's a parking space because he doesn't want to waste his good karma. So he parks I'm like, no, that's a wrong view. Don't go there, you know? So, but this is the one that's really problematic. We have a habit of doing that thing. So this is the one we really have to work with. And then the environmental result. This is weird. We can never figure this out. These ones are pretty intuitive. This one, and we'll look at those, we actually create the cause to be born in a certain environment, right, that corresponds to that karmic cause. And those are quite hard to figure out. This friend of mine who used to teach in New York, he had this student who came to him to kind of try and help figure out what was going on. Why had she created the cause for this experience she was happening? So she lived on this block, and it was the Lower East Side in New York. And for some reason, on her block, right in front of her house, it was one of those short streets, the garbage truck kept not coming to her street, and the garbage kept piling up. And there's rats, and it stinks, and it's summer in New York, and it was getting really intense. She was like, what is going on? Why is this happening only in front of my house, you know? And so she and her teacher sat down with the scriptures, and they're looking at the cause and result. There's a result of sexual misconduct karma that is, you'll live in a smelly, filthy, repulsive environment. Who would? That's one of those ones you have to read. So her teacher says to her, so she was married. So do you have affairs? You know, do you cheat? She's like, no, never. So do you flirt with other guys at parties? You know, he's trying to go to this. No, I never do anything like that. He knew she took the subway to work. So do you like check out cute guys on the subway? She's like, so cause and effect, you know, for these ones, like I said, you have to go to scripture. You would not be able to figure that one out. I had this really interesting one of this one. A teacher, I was living in this retreat center in California that had this kind of famously bad road. And there's this winter rainy season in California, and every winter the road would wash out, and we'd have to raise money to repair the road, and it was bumpy, and nobody with nice new cars ever wanted to come out to our retreat center. And the road was just this like hassle for us, you know, and we had to do this fundraiser. So one teacher came once, and he was teaching about karma, and he said to us that lived there publicly in front of an entire class, he said, you all that live here in this community, you talk about each other's backs. You have divisive speech, and that's why your road's so bad. So we're busted publicly by our teacher. And of course, we're all sitting in the front row because we live there. We're like, ooh. woo! And the next staff meeting we had, we realized he's right. He's right. We talked about it and we said, okay, we're really going to work on this. This is like publicly humiliating, and it's true. And we're going to work on this. So we were so careful for years, and we made these communication agreements about things that we would say when we'd start slipping into this bad behavior, you know, to try to check it. And we really, really worked hard. And I remember one spring, after the winter rains, we hadn't fixed our road yet. We're sitting outside having lunch, and we hear this sound of heavy machinery. So we kind of go running down, and there's this bulldozer with the blade down, you know, grading our road. And we say to the guy, like, hey, like, wait, who are you? We can't afford to pay. Oh, no, I work for the county. The county road finished 5 miles up the road. Oh, I work for the county, but I had some extra time today. So I thought I'd just come fix your part of the road too. Oh, and tomorrow I'm coming down to put gravel. I got some extra rock. I'll just rock your road too. So we walk back up and we go, that's weird. When does the county ever like volunteer to do your private road? And then we thought of that thing and we thought, wow, okay, we purified. Like that was a karmic shift, big time, that related to that. So that's interesting. If you work really hard at it, like I say, you can shift your own experience. You know, who would have thought that if we stopped talking about each other behind our backs and bickering and all of this business, the guy from the county would be forced by our virtue to come out and grade our road, okay? So that's how this works. So we'll look at these in terms of the 10 non-virtues. Any questions about these 4 karmic results, how this works? And we'll look at them more specifically in terms of the 10 non-virtues. Okay. Oh, we were talking about this. This is the next thing too. Factors determining the weight or heaviness of a karmic action. So the heavier the action, the more of a result we're going to experience, right? And we talked about this in terms of the killing as an example. So the nature of the action itself, killing is heavier than lying, right? Stealing is a heavier karma than idle gossip. Right? So there are certain karmas that are just heavier by their very nature. You're going to experience a more intense result just because of the nature of that action. And then we talked about this, the motivation. How, you know, malicious is your motivation? How much have you thought about it ahead of time? Is it something spontaneous, or have you really, really thought about it and worked up a good head of steam with your motivation? Okay? Determines how you engage in that action. For example, for killing, we said killing really in a cruel, malicious way, right? Versus something that you're trying to be merciful or whatever if you feel like you need to engage in killing. So kind of how do you engage in that action? And then the object. And we say that beings who have shown us incredible kindness in our lives, if we do a negative action directed towards those beings, much heavier than a negative action towards a total stranger. And what they usually say in scripture is, heavy objects are, for example, your parents. People have shown you great kindness. Your spiritual teachers, beings in some kind of need or somehow vulnerable, are heavy objects of our actions. And again, both good and bad. All of these apply to positive karma as well. We're kind of still talking about the negative. And you can see that in terms of a mental imprint. If someone has shown you a lot of kindness and you do something negative towards that person, you can see it makes a big impact on your mind, doesn't it? Than if something that you do to a total stranger. You kind of have to overcome more resistance, and so there's more of an impact in your mind to be unkind or do something cruel or negative to someone who's shown you a lot of kindness. habituation, and that just means how often do you engage in the action, right? It's going to have more of an impact if it's done habitually. And if there's no antidote ever applied. So if you never do anything that's the opposite of that action, you're going to have more of an effect from that than if you try to do something that cancels it out, right? The opposite action. So all of these are factors that determine the heaviness or the weight of an action. So any questions about that list? Okay. Yes?
So, I know that I have found myself noticing, remembering a situation during the day that I regret. And then, so I'm wishing, I'm hoping that I won't do it again. And I may do mantras, but I'm not specifically thinking of what action I could take that would be different other than.
Yeah.
So I'm not examining that and going through that in my mind necessarily. So you're talking about the negative karma being stronger if I don't take action. What kind of action then?
So we're going to talk about this when we talk about purification. And you mentioned doing certain mantras. There's certain traditional purification practices that we do, and we'll talk about those. Also, I think, and especially I think for us, we can also relate to doing a combination of traditional practices and thinking of the opposite, especially if it's something that we do habitually or something that's a heavy negative karma. I don't know, for me, we're so kind of pragmatic. I really advise people to do a combination of traditional practices and think of something that's the opposite to sort of cancel out that karmic imprint, right?
I got such a strong habit that the purification, I think over time has helped. Just remembering it, just being mindful of it and catching myself.
Right.
But I think I'm getting frustrated with myself for not being able to hurry it along, I guess.
Well, then it might be.
No.
I mean, think of the example I gave, which is kind of ridiculous, of, you know, talking about somebody behind their back and forcing myself to immediately compliment them, right? And that worked really fast because it was immediately, I applied the antidote in my action kind of instantaneously, right? So sometimes that can be very effective if you think of something that's the exact opposite action and do that right away. Even after the fact, I have a friend really good friend who was in the Israeli army, and he's not sure that he killed people, but in the conflicts that he was in at the time that he was in, he was pretty sure he probably did, right? So he's doing this thing right now of rescuing these dogs that are going to be euthanized because they're so vicious. Mostly he specializes in pit bull mixes and these things that are going to be euthanized, and he tries to rehabilitate them. And he loves dogs and he's really good at what he does. And he's doing it as a specific antidote for his killing karma, because every life he saves helps to cancel out. It's an antidote to that killing karma. And I just find that to be quite effective for our minds as well. So you might want to think, and sometimes you have to be creative. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Killing, not killing, right? I know people who have divisive speech karma, and then they decide to volunteer and do conflict resolution, right? Because that's the opposite. So sometimes we have to think really creatively about what can I, actually engage in that's going to be the opposite of that action. But I found that very powerful for the mind, engaging in that. Yeah.
I know this doesn't apply to everyone, but what if, like you're an actor and you're killing like the Stanislavski method is very like, you have to actually really feel it and you have to do it.
Right.
Really intense. Like, what if you're an actor? Because I come from a family of as well, and I mean, thespian, I have a little bit of a history there.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I have been in plays where I've had to kill, people.
Right.
So it's like, what kind of karma do you incur, and what's the antidote? For
Yeah,
that type
yeah.
of,
Yeah, no, that's a really, really interesting question. I've heard lamas say things not so much about acting. I heard one lama talking about martial arts, and he was saying, okay, you're not like really hurting people, you're doing these sort of things that are set up, but he goes, it still puts an imprint of violence in your mind. He said, even though you're not carrying out the whole action and completing it and all of that, and I can just only guess that it might be kind of a similar thing, right? Because even though you know you're not harming, but you're psyching yourself up as if you're feeling, you have to get into this thing, that method acting thing of like feeling the whole feeling. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
It's similar with like video games.
Oh yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, I think there, it's not the full
It's a
karma of
habituation.
killing. There's a habituation and there's an imprint.
And then we have football.
Yeah.
Competitive sports in general.
Yeah.
A lot of anger in there.
Yeah. Lisa.
The video game. I don't know if you're familiar with Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. She's a writer. She's of Harvard University, and she's an artist also. And I come from a theatrical background, and I studied the Stanislavski method. But what interests me about her is that she said, particularly, and I teach this when I do my writing, when I teach writing, I'm an English teacher, you are your art. There's no way that you can separate yourself totally from your art, and that, becomes a part of you. And I would agree with that in terms of if I'm acting out a character or if I'm writing a piece, I have that experience to some degree. So to some degree, I am that character, and that becomes a part of me. And that's why, I had the chance to go to Hollywood and, to be whatever, a star, whatever. But I chose not to. And that's one of the reasons why. Because it was real, but it wasn't real enough for me. It wasn't the real that I wanted in my life. But you do, that is you.
You do take on
Yeah,
that energy.
that's you.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think, like we can talk about the full karmic result, but there's a thing that I've noticed in my years of practice is that we become more and more sensitive to the low-level influences on our mind. It's almost like the princess and the pea thing. You just become very sensitive, and even anything that kind of is moving in that direction feels more and more uncomfortable, even though it's not the full thing, which sometimes requires us to make some difficult choices in our lives about what we're going to engage in, but it all has an effect on our minds. They do all these studies about these teenagers who play video games and blow away 1 billion people a day on the video. It's so much easier to pick up a gun because you're habituating yourself to that, even though it's not so-called real, right? So I think, that's one of the sort of responsibilities of us. You kind of can't increase your awareness about your life without increasing your awareness about how these things do influence us in making some choices, and I know a lot of actors in Hollywood choose not to play certain roles, right? If you're really famous, you have that choice to just go like, no, I don't want that role, I don't want that kind of influence. Because I think in terms of imprints in our minds, for sure there's an imprint, even if it's not the full result. And that's something that we just need to think about more and more if we're kind of serious about our spiritual path, I think, yeah.
Is it the purification that would be the antidote, obviously, but for that,
Yeah, for that too, yes.
With the nature of the great radius of the imprint, to choose the imprint of the visual. We were given the beauty of mirror of eyes, right? So it's like multi-millions seconds, a fraction of second that is infinite within the visual, correct? So the arts, of course, offers the extraordinary, I would not call it a weapon, because then we fall into a negative, but the preciousness, shall we say, of how your brain connects deeply, profoundly with the visual. Otherwise, as a human on the planet, as a species, we know there is a cruel part of the human species. And so that imprint, be the video game of the obsessional, it seems to me there's a nuance between the obsessional need that you talk about, the basic and the object, and the timing reflection of one who lets so passive, the passivity, yet at the same core, it feels that the visual is crucial to maintain a good health within the environment. You talk about the environment, which I've been reflecting a lot by the nature of what's happening in Paris and Greece and so on and so forth. So that imprint of the environment in the psyche by the nature of the visual, and I'm looking at it from the perspective that you offer by using the senses at a higher level rather than just keeping it like you're so dull, like you are very dull.
Well, that's right. I mean, we can just let ourselves be influenced, or we can choose. We can choose. And we'll get to that when we look at the 12 links. What are our choice points? Sometimes in Western religions we talk about free will. Karma does not mean that all of our choices are completely predetermined by our karma, right? Or that we're just completely passive robots of our karma. We do have choice points, and we'll look at that. And the more consciousness that we can bring to those choices and the more awareness, right, then we won't just kind of slip into this, letting ourselves be influenced by popular culture and the influences of media and things like that. So we'll look at that when we look at the 12 links. I'm thinking a lot of people are getting up. Let's take a brief break now, because a couple of people just jumped up. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and look at the 10 non-virtues and look at that. So just a couple of minutes, maybe 10-minute break.
going out Monday.
Winter travel is always, yeah.
And then you have to think about landing in Canada.
Well, luckily, my landing is San Francisco and Vancouver. So that's mostly rain, that's not mostly deep snow.
Yeah, you might have to
We'll
check.
see. Might have to do that.
Then we can show you the sights of Boston. Take you to the top of the hill for lunch.
Well, we'll rent a snow plow.
Yeah, right. With my luck, Monday will be another no travel day. That's all right. It's cool. I thought it's
At this point, that's what it's looking like.
Hey, another one down, right?
Yeah. Thank you. As my mother used to say, chickens come home to roost. You know what I'm saying?
That pretty much sums up the karma. Chickens come home to roost.
All right. So let's look at some of the non-virtues. This is not an what do you call it? Exhaustive, exclusive list, but this is usually what we. In Buddhism, this is sort of a jumping off point. It is this list of what we call the 10 non-virtues. So there are things that are non-virtuous that are not on this list, but these are sort of general themes and categories, and some of the heaviest things, some of the things that we can kind of use for at least, kind of starting our sort of investigation of non-virtue. And they're divided into body, speech, and mind. So let's look at these. 3 physical non-virtues, 4 verbal, and 3 that are just mental. So these are considered non-virtues, but not just mental afflictions, okay? So they're beyond just a disturbing emotion, a mental affliction, something that disturbs your peace of mind. There's specific karmic results of these 3 mental ones, so we'll look at this. But let's start with body. Killing a human or an animal down to the tiniest insect. And nowadays there's a bunch of debates about, are amoebas sentient beings? Well, Lord Buddha didn't have a microscope, so he talks about beings that are visible to the naked eye, right, as sentient beings, but it includes insects, animals, and so forth. So deliberately killing any, animal, insect. And then, like I said, there's debates about viruses and parameciums and things like that. But, is that a sentient being or not? So killing any sentient being, and killing yourself by any means, poison, weapons, or getting someone to do it for you for killing karma counts as. We're having a discussion during the break about vegetarianism, right? Big topic. If you do not, just eating meat is not considered killing karma unless you either kill the animal that you're going to eat, or you ask Farmer Joe to kill the animal specifically for you. Just buying the shrink-wrapped meat at the Safeway is not considered killing karma. However, and this was our discussion during the break, a lot of people feel like being involved in any way, even indirectly, with that whole chain of supply and demand is uncomfortable, right? So many people choose to be vegetarian just because they don't want to be involved. But just to buy and eat meat is not considered killing karma with the full result of killing unless you do it yourself or ask the farmer or whoever to butcher for you, okay? Stealing, and this is taking anything of value that belongs to another person. And there's a certain value mentioned in Buddhist scripture that people have tried to kind of calculate and transfer to, American dollars. Basically anything of worth. A pencil, probably okay. A sweater, no. Anything of value that the person would miss. But a lot of people try to deal with this one at a very subtle level and just not take anything that's not offered, right? So that gets really interesting. When I was first working with this Buddhist ethics, I was living in California, and I had a friend who was also a Buddhist student who lived in San Francisco, and I was down in Boulder Creek, which is near. near Santa Cruz. So I'd go up to her house for the weekend for Buddhist teachings that would happen in San Francisco. At that point, I had long hair. So I'd be in her shower, and I hadn't brought my shampoo. So there's her bottle of shampoo, you know, at the corner of the shower. But I'm kind of thinking, I don't even want to take anything that hasn't been offered. So I'd walk into the hallway dripping wet and shout down the hall, "Can I borrow some shampoo?" So it got to the point where every time I'd show up at the door with my day pack, she'd go, "Look, anything in the house, the tea, the soy milk, the shampoo, the soap, you just use it." So we wouldn't have to go through this whole trip. But it's interesting to be aware of that, is just to think, anything that is not specifically offered for your use. Now, in a family or a relationship where there are things that are agreed upon that they are shared among the family, of course, fine. You don't have to ask permission if there's agreements that things are shared. The prison inmates, we're working with this list, and they said, there's this thing that when they get their tray of, they eat horrible, like hot dogs and potato chips, just the most worst food. And they would say they get the little packets of ketchup and mustard and things. And then there was this sort of what do you call it? Just sort of this tradition that if they didn't need their condiments, they would put it in the middle of the table for anybody else that wanted more. And then they would say, "Is it okay to take that?" And I said, "No, the agreement is everybody understands the extra goes there, right? So you can take something out of the free box, you cannot take it out of the lost and found. That's the deal, right?" So things like that, if it's agreed that this is up for grabs, it's not considered stealing karma, okay? So we have to be careful. And the big thing, and you might think, oh yeah, I'm not going around nicking people's sweaters, you know, off the hook. Copying media, right? Bootleg, software, CDs, DVDs. The Lamas say, follow the copyright laws in your country. Okay? Just saying. That's what this. I was teaching a karma class in Colombia in South America, in Bogota, where I've been a couple of times, and I went back 2 years after the karma class. They picked me up at the airport in Bogota. On the way to the center, they're like, "That karma course you taught 2 years ago, we're still talking about it." This woman is trying to be good about her karma. She goes to the Apple store to buy the official software for some program. And the guy at the store is like, "We don't even carry that. Go out on the street and you can buy a copy." It was like, "What are you in here?" And she's like, "My Buddhist teacher told me I have to." He was like, "You're nuts." Right out there, the guy is selling the thing. She said it was really hard to even keep that vow in Colombia. Like, there's all of this bootleg software. So that's one of the ones that does come up for us. So I'm just saying that is considered stealing if you violate, you know, make copies of the CD of music for your friends. That is considered stealing karma, right? Because it is actually not your property to distribute. So we need to be careful about that. Sexual misconduct, basically, obviously anything non-consensual that's harmful in that way, right? That, you know, any sexual behavior that's harmful, basically it would be cheating on a committed partner, right? So if you're in a committed monogamous relationship with that agreement and you have a sexual relationship with someone else, or if you have a sexual relationship with someone else who's in such a relationship, that's considered sexual misconduct. And I know there's all these modern arrangements that people have these days. Frankly, I don't think they ever work, these 3 ways and these open things and all of that stuff. But it's basically about, if you have that kind of an arrangement, don't cheat on your partner or have it. Now, there are times when someone will lead you to believe that they are single when they are not. If you truly believe that they're available, right, and they're really not, that's not your sexual misconduct because you thought that that person was single, right? So that's not. The minute you find out they're not, stop, okay? That's the sexual misconduct. And then the speech ones, lying, leading anyone to believe something that is not in fact true. And actually, even though that's considered speech karma, we can do that non-verbally too. You can do that through a gesture. You can even do that through silence. You know, if somebody asks you a question and you don't say anything, if that somehow leads them to believe something that's not true, right? And if you know that, if it's, you know that that's the conclusion that they're going to reach, even though you haven't opened your mouth, it's still considered lying. Now, this one gets interesting because we have to be careful not to pass along a bunch of information that we don't know for sure to be true. Yeah, if we believe that something is true and say it to someone, it's not considered lying. But again, at a more subtle level, we should be careful about what we say to others as fact. If we, you've heard it sixth hand, from an unreliable source, right? So be a little bit aware of that. But this is deliberately misleading someone. Now, this does not mean that you have to say everything that's true at all times and every opportunity either, right? Because sometimes a skillful thing to do is to keep your mouth shut, right? So you have to be, again, some wisdom has to enter in here. Lord Buddha had this beautiful thing he said about speech. He said, if it's not beneficial and not true, don't say it. If it's true but not beneficial, don't say it. If it's beneficial but not true, don't say it. Only if it's true and beneficial, and then wait for the right time. Okay, so that was the instruction about speech. Divisive speech involves trying to divide people that have some kind of a harmonious relationship, or if they're already somehow there's a rift, you're making it worse. Okay, so deliberately using speech that divides people who have some sort of a harmonious relationship, or they're already estranged and you're saying something that makes it worse. That's what divisive speech is. Okay? Again, knowingly doing that. If you say something that has that effect, but that wasn't your intention at all, right? You just happen to say something about somebody and then the other person reacts in a certain way that causes a rift, that's not considered divisive speech. So even if it has that effect, if that wasn't your intention, not terrific, but not considered divisive speech. And then harsh speech, abusive, critical, yelling, right? So basically abusive speech. So you're, harshly critical of somebody, humiliating, abusive, like that. Now, if you say something about somebody, you make a comment about something they're especially sensitive about, and you hurt their feelings, but it wasn't your intention at all, that's not considered harsh speech, because that wasn't your intention. It just happened to be you made a comment about something that they were sensitive about, okay? Swearing counts, which is really, I'm still working on that one. So swearing also counts as harsh speech. Idle gossip. And that you might think, well, what's the big deal about that? This is talking a lot about things that are basically meaningless and acting as if they were meaningful. Okay, one of the there's a couple of dangers of that. One is it's an enormous time waster, isn't it? I mean, how much can you talk about what was on television last night, right? How much can you talk about politics? And also, how much can you do this before it starts moving in this direction? How much can you just be talking without engaging in harsh speech, divisive speech, lying? So even though this seems a little benign in terms of, the severity, we do it all the time, right? So in terms of the frequency, it's something we engage in a lot, and we can often kind of go in this direction. So any questions about those lists of the body and the speech? Yes?
Deflated footballs included in idle gossip.
You know, this is interesting, this one. Of course, in the time of Lord Buddha, there was not television, internet, all the luminous rectangles, you know? He was just talking about sitting around gossiping. But I also think, how much time are we wasting with all of these other media, you know, in ways that are not beneficial, thinking that things that are, you know, and it sucks you in. Like, it's unbelievable. Facebook, forget it, right? I mean, I just went on Facebook a month and a half ago, and then I was like, oh my God, you can spend days doing this thing. How many cute cat videos can you watch? Wikipedia, that's my thing, because I'm looking up something really important. Once I kind of came out of a trance. I was looking up something on Wikipedia on one of the Buddhist sites that I needed for a class. About 17 minutes later, I'm looking at Oprah's hairstyles over the ages. I'm looking at her class photo when she was 10, and I'm like, whoa, how did I get here? What link did I follow to be I was like, I don't even have a hairstyle. Why am I looking at Oprah's? What is this? You know, she had the Farrah Fawcett thing happening in 1980, whatever it was. So it really can suck you in. So we have to be really careful about that one, I think. Again, we may not think that we're sitting around talking to people, but we're in front of the time waster, you know, internet or the television or whatever. Any other questions about those lists? Yes?
Oh, I was just going to say about the device of speech and lying. Also, the internet is it's very easy to fall prey to the disinformation out there, or you're not sure where the source is.
Yeah.
So, and then you end up talking about some political thing that you heard or something, and then it's like, where did you hear that from? Because the integrity of journalism has fallen by the wayside. So there's no, so it's very easy.
Oh, it's really true. You know, people say that. Even people come up to me and they say, oh, I read this thing about Buddhism, and they quote something that's just wrong. And they go, well, I read it on the internet. I was like, well, gee, you know, not everything that appears on the internet. So yeah, that's another one too, definitely is, what is the source of that information before you go copying and pasting links and spreading information. So I think a lot of these speech ones we can engage with definitely electronically, for sure. Yeah.
So, are you going to be giving examples, or can you give an example now of how to deal with situations in which you, for instance, my husband's giving a party tomorrow. People will be at my house.
Yeah.
And so they'll be talking about the game, they'll be talking about all sorts of things. If I don't want to engage in idle gossip, how can I not do that?
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I find, and people always come up with this again when they start to get involved in practice, and often it comes up in work situations, like they eat lunch with their coworkers, and they say, all they're doing during lunch is this. Do I just eat my sandwich in my car from now on? Like, what do I do? And I think we can elevate the conversation to something meaningful, right? If it's done in a skillful way that doesn't seem at all self-righteous, right? Steer the conversation. So you're there and your guests are talking about something stupid. Let them do that, and then start to talk about something that's more meaningful, that's more uplifting, and that's more inspiring. And it takes practice to get to the point of getting skillful about doing that without it just kind of seeming weird and contrived. But I find people actually really want to talk about meaningful things. They just are in a bad habit of gossiping, because that's what everybody does. Again, they just slide to the lowest common denominator, right? And you put this energy, this alternative energy in there, and just try and uplift the tone of the conversation if you can. Now, this one doesn't mean that we only ever talk about the Four Noble Truths for the rest of our life either. You know, and the Lamas say to connect with people, to be harmonious, right? We have to. You know, you go to visit your family for Thanksgiving. You can't just sit there with your mouth shut. So when it's justified, but this is just saying really habitually in a way that wastes a ton of time. But look at the motivation to connect with other people. I mean, I find myself doing that when I get to know people, you know, new students or whatever. Sure, I'm sitting next to somebody on a plane, just to connect. I'll talk about whatever they want to talk about. It's nothing I do habitually on a daily basis, but in that situation you do it. So it may be at the party you just have to say, okay, there's going to be a lot of that going on. I'll try and uplift it when I can, and I might not always be able to, right? So you might just have to say, for the harmony in the relationship and my husband's friends and all of that, I'm just going to do this. But again, just being aware, how much time do we waste? You know, people always say, oh, I don't have enough time to meditate. And I just go, how much time are you parked in front of Facebook? Honestly, check. You know, our precious human rebirth is fleeting. Tick, tick, tick. It's running out. The hourglass is tipped over and it's running out. And we need to kind of have that awareness about our lives and how much time we need to relax. Like I say, it's not like we can just be meditating and talking about the Four Noble Truths all the time. We need to relax, but it's just about the balance there, I think, and what's the benefit of doing it. Okay, then the last three are mental. Covetousness, which is defined as wanting to possess something that belongs to someone else. And for this to be complete, the completion of this is you decide to take action to do it. You haven't taken the action yet, but you've decided, I want that and I'm going to do something to get it. So I would say it's sort of halfway between attachment and stealing, right? So for a covetousness karma to be complete, you not only are wanting something that belongs to someone else, but you decide, I'm going to somehow possess it, right? But you haven't actually taken it yet, okay? But you can see it's heavier than just attachment or just...
include wanting your husband's money?
Wow, well. How far are you willing to go, Lisa?
That's a joke.
Okay. Yeah.
I was going to say, like, covetousness can include, like, wanting somebody's job or something like that.
Yeah. It doesn't need to be necessarily a possession. It can be a reputation. You know, somebody has a reputation that you want, right? And you'll do action to ruin their reputation so that people will think well of you. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily need to be necessarily a tangible object. Yeah. Maliciousness, and that's that intent to harm, okay? That is in mind. You haven't taken action yet, but you've decided, I am going to engage in some action that will harm someone. Ill will is sometimes another translation of this one, malice, maliciousness, ill will. Wrong views, and that's denying things like the possibility of enlightenment, rebirth, and cause and effect. Okay, now this is not, you're a new Buddhist student and you're just sort of checking things out and you're not 100% convinced. This is, you've gotten enough evidence to convince you, and out of contrariness, you're just going against what the Buddha taught, right? And refuting what the Buddha taught. But people kind of panic about this one. It doesn't mean as a new student, because these things take a while to understand. But this is saying you're deliberately refuting what the Buddha taught. Now, some of these concepts take a while to grapple with. One of the recommendations is, rather than just completely rejecting out of hand some of these things that, you know, for Western culture, a bit of a stretch, put it on the back burner, take it out again later and re-examine it. Don't just reject it out of hand, okay? But if we deny things, if we are a spiritual practitioner, we're already committed, and then we somehow deny the possibility of enlightenment, deny that our actions have results, it just sort of undermines our whole spiritual path, doesn't it? So you can see how that can be a negative thing. So again, not everything is on this list. Punching somebody in the nose is not on this list, and it's obviously a non-virtue, but you can see this kind of fulfills a lot of the main categories. For example, in the monastic vows, there are hundreds of monastic vows that we take. All of them fit into one of these categories, right? They're all kind of specific instances of, you know, these general categories. So these are sort of umbrellas that there are a lot of instances included in. So any questions about this list? Yes?
What about the reciprocal? So, not that we'd be alive if we were killed, but we could be stolen against, we could be harassed, we could be lied.
Receiving end.
Yeah, on the receiving end of all of these things. That obviously reflects non-virtue of the other individual, but also our response is sort of critical not to create non-virtue for ourselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. So non-retaliation, right, is a big ethical sort of ideal in Buddhism. And so there's something called the 4 pure practices. Not killing if someone harms you, not retaliating by killing, not scolding back if somebody's yelling at you, not humiliating someone back if they humiliate and criticize you, and not beating someone if they physically try and beat you and harm you. And so that's called the 4 pure practices. And in other ways too, you know, not stealing back if someone steals from you, but these are kind of, you know, just, again, if we experience that for the object of that action, great, another one down. Don't retaliate, because then you'll just get the ball rolling again. And we'll look at that again when we look at the 12 links. We'll really look at where do we cut through? Where's that choice point where we can stop that cycle from happening? We've had an experience, you know, please do not start a whole nother cycle. And that's the way we can end it and actually get free of that entire cycle that creates suffering. Yeah. Any other questions about these 10?
We do experience that, and instead of having the desire to feel whatever great negative emotion that can have on one, is that where emptiness comes in?
Yeah, and an understanding of both karma and emptiness really help a lot. You say, okay, you know, I am experiencing this because some cause was created, maybe the best attitude really is there anything I can learn from this experience, right? Can this person who's actually even engaging in some harm or criticizing me or whatever, is there anything I can learn from this? You know, is it just my pride reacting to criticism? And is that really something constructive in there? I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can sort of turn it around, right, and make it into a lesson, or at the very least, even if it just seems explicitly harmful, just at least don't react, you know. But yeah, an understanding of impermanence, of karma, of emptiness, all help in those kind of situations and give us sort of the power so that we won't retaliate. Really, because with only that understanding will we be able to overcome that knee-jerk response that we want to retaliate. Yeah. All right, are you ready for your karma quiz? Does everybody have something to write with? Okay. Anybody else need a pen? Okay. Ooh, well done. Yeah, in 1 second. Stay right there. I will need you in a minute. Okay, now we're going to hand these out. There's a flap folded over. Promise me you will not peek. Do I get Scouts, Girl Scouts honor? Everybody's? Okay, don't peek. my lovely assistant, Doug.
I better take out my glasses too.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have told everybody, bring your reading glasses today. If you don't, I will hold it up here. You can- All right, so you will see two columns. One is titled Personal Experience and one is titled General Environment, and then a bunch of phrases. Thanks, Doug. So what I want you to do is check the box next to that phrase that is representative of your experience in your life. And do kind of a first thoughts kind of thing, just if you resonate with that. If you read that phrase and you're like, ooh yeah, check it. If you have to analyze too much and go, oh, has this ever happened in my life? Don't check it, okay? Just, is that representative of your experience, especially recently? Now, it's kind of interesting. You might want to make another kind of notation. If something happened to you a lot earlier in your life, but it hasn't been happening for a long time, you might want to make some kind of a note there, right? Because that means that you were having that experience. Now, as I mentioned before, all of these texts about cause and effect were written in the time of Lord Buddha, this agrarian economy. So there's these things like your crops failing and disappointing fruit and trees. Now, those of you that live in Boston may not have orchards and fields. Think about your stocks going down in value, or your businesses your business losing money. So think more broadly, especially these agricultural ones, rough, difficult terrain. Does the street in front of your house have a ton of potholes, when you drive down it? Right? So think more broadly, especially about the environmental ones. This is taking straight from scripture, so I haven't, interpreted a lot, but do that in your mind, okay? So go ahead, just check any boxes that seem to apply to your experience. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Somehow Dangers to Life came out in a different font. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but anyway.
The general environment's not particularly positive.
No, we're still looking at negative karma. Sorry. We're still on the first two noble truths.
Is that two different categories in natural life? Is that like...
Yeah, so one is in your general environment. Do the people in your country or your environment have a short average lifespan, right? So like a country in Africa now where everybody's dying of Ebola would be, that's the general environment right now, right? So in Boston, not bad. You've got Mass General, you got good hospital. Yeah, so that's kind of the general environment, not particular. Because if you'd had a short lifespan already, you wouldn't be here. Yes.
I'm still confused about the general environment. So in our own personal property, there's conditions as opposed to the neighborhood?
Yeah, if that's the experience, I mean, it can be as localized as if there's something happening on your actual property, even if it's different than the neighborhood. Yeah, I would note that. Remember the lady with the garbage piling up outside of her house, right?
attitude that's considered also hopelessness?
Else is completely falling apart if that's your personal environment. No, it's, are you having that experience? Are you having that experience?
Or disharmony and deceit around you? Friends around you?
Yeah. In your kind of immediate circle of people. That's sort of like, sort of non-virtuous things appear appealing and attractive, like things that are actually kind of not beneficial are sort of attractive and appealing to you. Yeah.
You don't have to check all the boxes, do
You could say all of them.
Yeah, really. I actually had one student who only checked one box. And I was just like, really? Wow. I didn't quite believe that evaluation.
With perception.
Yeah.
I give you a perception of mine as like arid, drab, and barren lands. I lived in Egypt for 8 years, but I loved it.
Yeah.
Because it was always sunny.
Right.
It was always warm.
I know, that's one of the things too.
So it's kind of like, it depends how you view it.
Yeah. And again, these are meant to be things that are unpleasant experiences for you, right? So in a way
This
that
is the negative
this
karma
is still the
quiz.
negative karma. Yeah, thank you. I should rename it the negative karma quiz, right? If you love Aaron, then that's a different story. So who needs more time? We're pretty much wrapping up. All right, now you can open the flap. So in the third column, you see the corresponding non-virtue in terms of the 10 non-virtues. And what I want you to do now, and this is a little complicated, so look at what I'm pointing to. You'll see, for example, the first 2 rows correspond to killing karma, right? So in terms of killing karma, there are 4 possible outcomes, 4 possible results. What I want you to do now, for each group of 4 things that corresponds to each non-virtue, total how many out of 4 you checked. So for example, for killing, you might have checked 2 of the 4 boxes that correspond to killing. Write a little 2 in the left-hand column. So go down and score your quiz. So for each group of 4 possibilities that relate to each non-virtue, just total up how many of those 4 boxes did you check?
So if one of the boxes was just an earlier situation?
Just mark that somehow, note that somehow, right? Because you're no longer having that experience, but it's interesting to just think about it in terms of, okay, that's something that you used to have that maybe now you've purified that karma, so you're no longer having that experience. Yeah, or just some little mark. Okay, so see how each 2 rows correspond in the third column. You've got 2 rows that correspond to killing, right? See that? So of those 2 rows, you've got 2 columns. So you've got 4 boxes that correspond to killing.
Right, 2 in the personal experience
and 2 in the general environment. So how many out of those, do you get that, Lisa? Yeah, so how many out of those 4?
0 out of
0,
4.
0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Yeah.
Something in between there.
Yeah.
For each one.
For each one.
And there are 1, 2, 3, 4.
So there are going to be 10.
8, 9, 10.
So out of the 10 non-virtues, how high you score in the results of that non-virtue? Somebody wanted me to do an online version of this. That part of the instruction was really hard to do without pointing. I should have done a video.
So if you have the earlier number and then the present number, and
Yeah,
the
just
present number is lower, then that means you're obviously in the right path. Is that what that means?
that's what that means. And that's why I say a lot of my students do this over several years apart, and they notice a real shift in their experience. Yeah. So you might notice that you have a couple of clusters, right? Right? It's probably not 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 all the way down. You might have a couple that rate higher than others. So those are the ones that are interesting to work with in terms of your karmic purification plan. Now we're going to talk about strategies for purifying. Those are the karmas that are giving you still your unwanted experiences, because usually we don't just create the cause once, right? We keep creating the cause, we keep experiencing the results, and you might notice, as I mentioned before, that the ones that score high are things you know you might have trouble with. Still, you know that there's still a habit, maybe to do that thing, or you're not really surprised. Some people are really surprised. They're like, wow, that doesn't relate to anything I'm doing right now. So great. You did it in a past life. You don't have the habit of that anymore, right? But for some people, they go, oh yeah, working on that one. Yeah, still experiencing a lot of the results of karmas that we still have a habit of doing. So now look in the last column under solutions. So the solutions are, we're going to talk about purification in general in a minute. The solutions are avoiding doing that action and doing the opposite, right? So for killing, avoid killing and protect lives. Remember I said the counter imprint that neutralizes that bomb. Like my friend who is in the Israeli army and he's saving the pit bulls, specifically as an antidote to his killing karma. So he's protecting lives. So this is how we can work out our strategies for purifying that karma, you know, because it's giving us our unwanted experiences. So I think it's helpful to pick maybe 1 or 2 things that are particularly heavy in terms of your experience, and really target those very deliberately in terms of your personal purification plan right now. Interesting, I mentioned several times working in prisons. Many of the guys I work with are there because of 1, 2, or 3. 4 out of 4. They are sold on karma after they do their karma quiz, because whatever they're in there for, they're having that experience. Usually it's 4 out of 4. And then they open up the flap and they're like, this karma thing is true, you know? So that's how we can work with this in our own lives. Now, of course, we've all done all 10 of the non-virtues in some lifetime, if not this one. So it's not like we're exempt. But again, to really focus your strategy on the things that are, you know, giving you your really unwanted experiences. So any questions about this? Is anybody really surprised No. I didn't think so. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you wouldn't really guess necessarily, especially for the environmental ones, that they correspond to that non-virtue. So for a lot of people, when they do the karma quiz, all of a sudden they just feel like, oh, wow, gosh, I have a lot more confidence in what the Buddha taught about cause and effect. Yes?
The connection between senseless speech, that's idle gossip, is that?
Yes.
Senseless, okay, so
Yeah.
the connection between that and not being respected and lacking self-confidence?
Yeah.
I don't get that.
Okay, so you're just talking about meaningless things all the time. People just ignore you because you're just chattering away. I had a friend who really struggled with, this is a great example of this. She was one of those people, there's an expression, what's on your mind is in your mouth or on your lips, or there's some expression like that. Her speech was just this running stream of every random thought that went through her head. And it was just kind of like, oh my God, like everything just kind of came out, whether it was meaningful or not. She had an experience at work that she was working in this company, and she and her boss and another coworker were trying to figure out a new accounting software on the computer, and they're all clustered around the screen trying to figure out how this new spreadsheet works. And she kept going, I think we should enter the data point in that column. And her boss and her coworker kept going, I don't know, where should we enter that data point? I don't know, where should we put it? Finally, her coworker, 20 minutes in, said, I think we should enter the data point into that column. She'd been saying it for 15 minutes. Yeah. And then suddenly her boss is like, great idea, let's enter the data point in that. And my friend is like, oh my God, that's what I've been saying. She was studying Buddhism, and then that made her realize, oh, because I just chatter meaninglessly all the time. Even when I'm saying something important, people just tune it out. So that's what that one is, right? So you can see that. I have a friend who was a monk for many years. He's given his vows back. He was one of these people. I told that thing about the Buddha saying, only if it's true and beneficial, wait for the right time. This guy would say about 3 sentences per day, right? Everything that came out of his mouth was so meaningful because it was completely measured. I just felt like before he opened his mouth, he checked the criteria. True, beneficial, not true, not true. You just say to him, hey, how's it going? He'd be like, oh, very well, thank you. He's all, but everything he said, it was like that old ad on TV, when E.F. Hutton talks, everyone listens. Remember that ad of everybody's in the restaurant and somebody says, when this guy talked, everyone was like, so it was the opposite of that, right? So if we're just chattering meaninglessly, people just will tune us out. But if we just are saying meaningful things, then people pay attention to what we're saying. So that's what that one's about. Yeah, Donna.
Well, I don't get the lack of parks and gardens for senseless speech.
Yeah, that one, like I said, the environmental ones we can't really figure out. They don't necessarily make sense. Those are the ones that we have to rely on scripture, right? They're non-intuitive, basically, and those are one of the things that we just rely on the Buddha's teachings for that, because we can't directly see, the correlation for that one.
Where people would hang out and do nothing. and engage in senseless speech versus working.
Right.
They were good for nothing.
Yeah. And like I said, the environmental ones we just sort of like, accept because they're not necessarily intuitive. But it's kind of cool, isn't it? So we can really target our purification plan. I think we're going to take instead of taking one longer break, I think we'll take 2 shorter breaks. And then we'll take another break, and then we'll come back and look at purification and more about how to work with this 4th column of the solutions. Some of you know about purification with what we call the 4 opponent powers. So we'll talk about that. And then how do we sort of combine some of the traditional purification practices with sort of these creative ones that we can come up with. But again, this whole weekend is about how do our actions of body, speech, and mind create our experience. So we can see now it's creating it. You know, our karma is creating our experience. And so we can start working with it right away with our purification practices. Okay, so maybe let's come back at, how about 4 exactly, which is in nearly 15 minutes. Yeah, I'll ring the bell. I promise I won't start talking. Great, thank you. guys are doing great. I know it's so many lists and so much stuff to take in. And we've just got a couple more things that I want to do today. And then there's the other really big piece about the 12 links, but I kind of want people to be fresh for that. So I think we'll just finish the bits and pieces about karma and then maybe approach the 12 links with a nice fresh mind tomorrow morning. So that part's really cool. That's the coolest thing. So I definitely want you guys to be fresh for that one. Okay, so in terms of, one other little piece of karma that came up during the break. Somebody was asking about the difference between what we often call throwing karma and completing karma. Okay, so there's two kind of ways that karma can ripen. We say that the karmic imprint that is ripening at the time of death is very important because it can determine the next rebirth state. I think most of you know in Buddhism we talk about different realms. That's right. We've got the human realm, the animal realm. We also have realms characterized by extreme suffering. We have these pleasure beings, realms characterized by extreme sensory pleasures. So what karma is ripening at the time of death can determine our actual realm of rebirth. We've got, in the 4 results, we've got the, what is that one? We've got the fruitional results, which determines our next rebirth, but we have a lot of those in our mind stream. And that's why it's really important, and we have a lot of practices in Tibetan Buddhism especially, to be done at the time of death. This is seen as a really, really important place to practice, okay? And especially the state of mind at the time of death, very, very important, because that can act as a condition for a virtuous karmic seed to ripen. So if we have a virtuous, positive, compassionate state of mind at the time of death, that will be a condition that a virtue karma will ripen to give us a beneficial rebirth. If you have a mind filled with a lot of anger, for example, at the time of death, or a negative state of mind, a lot of fear or anger, that can act as a condition for a negative karma to ripen that will determine a negative rebirth. So we have a huge emphasis. I was taking a Buddhist chaplaincy training once, and we were talking about, different sort of chaplaincy opportunities, including hospice work, which I'd done a lot of. And this guy came in and he was explaining about sort of the Tibetan Buddhist approach to the death process. And he goes, it's very specific, a lot of detail. And he goes, that's why when you look at the Buddhist books about death and dying, there's like 15 from the Tibetan perspective and like 1 from Zen, or something. I mean, it's this whole big sort of teaching about the death process. So that's another thing. Then we say the completing karma is then that rebirth determined by what we call a throwing karma, and then the circumstances of that rebirth are determined by completing karma. All the other karma will lead to the experiences in that rebirth, okay? So, for example, we have Scruffy over here, this adorable service dog that no doubt is loved and nurtured and taken care of and is benefiting his sentient being very well by helping. So we would say, okay, doggy rebirth. So there was a throwing karma that determined a dog rebirth, but the completing karma, really good, right? Pampered, taken care of, versus a street dog in India, right, would have the same throwing karma to determine a dog realm rebirth, but eating out of garbage heaps, covered in mange, like that, right? So that's kind of the difference between, the throwing karma and the completing karma. So those are 2 other ways. So we do have, I mean, that's a whole different topic. I know a couple of you mentioned you're very interested in kind of the Buddhist approach to the death process. I know some of you have gotten some teachings on that. But that's why we say, especially, you know, if the person that we know that's going into the death process, it said, if you die with a mind filled with compassion, there is no way you can be reborn in a lower realm. You know, that's kind of a mind filled, a heart filled with thoughts of loving kindness and compassion at the moment of death. And so there are a lot of practices we can do to prepare actually for that moment. And we emphasize that a lot in Tibetan Buddhism. But just to kind of answer that question, does that help? Okay, great. Yeah, just wanted to mention because that's another kind of division of karma. So I wanted to talk a little bit about purification practices, because remember I said there's basically 3 ways we can approach karma in our practice. And we haven't really talked about virtue. We'll talk about that at the end. That'll be dessert at the end of the day, since we've been talking about all the negative stuff all day long. So accumulating virtue or positive spiritual potential, we'll talk a little bit about that. Avoiding creating new non-virtue. So trying to avoid the 10 non-virtues as much as possible. Okay, impossible to avoid all of them all the time. We can say, probably, for example, I will not deliberately kill a human or an animal for the rest of this life. That we can probably say we can do. The other ones, you know, especially the speech ones, the mental ones, a little bit harder to say we'll avoid completely, but we do our best to avoid creating any new non-virtue. And then the non-virtue we've already created, we try to purify. Because as I said, once that imprint is in our mind stream, only 2 options: experience it or purify before we have that experience. So that's an option. Lama Zopa Rinpoche comes right out, our teacher comes right out and says, if you understand karma and you know how to purify and you don't engage in a purification practice every day, you're insane. He just doesn't beat around the bush. He just says, you're nuts if you don't purify every day, right? Because then, otherwise, we definitely will experience, and we don't know what kind of karma we've created, right? Even in this life, we might have created negativities that we're not even aware of, and for sure in past lifetimes. So let's look a little bit at purification, how we go about it. And I know some of you have received teachings on purification with what we call the 4 opponent powers. So again, whether we're doing one of the traditional practices or whether we're doing one of these antidotes, that the opposite. We're protecting lives. We're speaking harmoniously. Because remember I said it's kind of nice to combine the traditional practices with some of these actions that are actually the opposite. Really helpful to do them in conjunction with the 4 opponent powers, which are these. So let's talk about these. The first one is regret. Okay? Now, not to be confused with guilt. Guilt and regret are 2 different things. One of my friends says, the intelligent regret of an educated Buddhist, he calls this. And this is understanding, because of cause and effect, if we've created the cause, we will experience the result unless we've purified. It's not saying, oh, I'm a terrible person, I'm awful, I'm evil, at all. It's just that thing I did was non-virtuous. Because karma is definite and certain, I will experience an unpleasant result of that unless I purify. So you generate this sense of urgency and regret over that action that you've done. And then the force of reliance, what we're really relying on is the methods taught by the Buddha that we can use to purify our negative karma. We're relying on the Dharma methods. What we usually do in our practice at this point, we have a verse that we take refuge and generate bodhicitta. A lot of you might be familiar with that verse, because we say that mostly, well, I don't think there are any other options. All of our non-virtue is either against the three jewels or sentient beings. That sort of covers all the bases, right? It's either an enlightened being or a sentient being. So when we take refuge and generate bodhicitta, it's a way of sort of, making amends to those beings that we have wronged, so, and we're relying on that refuge, especially in the Dharma, and our reliance on the Dharma methods as a means of purification. And then we engage in the remedy. And in your booklet, I put a list in here of the traditional remedies, and it's on the top of page 11. So, reciting the names of Buddhas. Some of you are familiar, there's a practice called Confession to the 35 Buddhas, right, that comes from a sutra called the Sutra of the Three Heaps. It's usually done in conjunction with prostrations while we're reciting the names of these 35 different Buddhas. Has anybody done that practice of prostration to the 35? So a handful of you have done that. So that would be an example of that one, of purification while we're reciting the Buddha's names. Mantras, and I said like VS, that stands for Vajrasattva mantra. So I know some of you have also done that practice. It's a visualization and purification practice that involves the recitation of a certain mantra. Reciting sutras. And our teacher Lama Zopa Rinpoche often has students recite the Golden Light Sutra or the Diamond Cutter Sutra. Sometimes the centers will have a group recitation of a sutra. That's a purification practice. Meditating on emptiness. That's actually the most powerful purification practice because it's the direct antidote to that ignorance that's the root of samsara. So studying and meditating on emptiness, really, really powerful purification practice. Making offerings and making holy objects and sacred images. So these are the 6 traditional purification practices. That list comes from a book by Master Shantideva. We've talked about the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Master Shantideva wrote 2 other texts. One has been lost completely. One exists and has been translated into English. It's called the Shiksa Samuchaya, or Compendium of Trainings. And that's a very interesting book because it has a lot of the lists and sources of the details that show up in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So in these beautiful verses in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Master Shantideva talks about these practices, and then all the details are in the Compendium of Practices. So a translation of that exists, and that's the source of all 6 of these, which are drawn from the Sutras of the Buddha. So I always think it's quite useful to combine these traditional ones with the direct antidote from the 4th column, right? So if you have killing karma, do your Vajrasattva practice, do your recitation of the 35 Buddha's names, and donate to an animal rescue organization. Save lives. Do them both. I think for us, we can kind of relate to that kind of a combined practice. So working with the 4th column, especially for the things that, we rated high, can be really helpful. And you will see, a couple of people asked during the break, will I see a change if you work hard at it, even in this lifetime, for sure. Even in a short period of time. Remember my story about the road in the divisive speech, and us with our karma forcing the guy from the county to grade our road. Our karma made him. He probably wanted to turn around and go home. Our karma hooked him, because we've been working. So you can see results in your own life. And that's why karma is not like destiny or fate or anything. It's dynamic. And that's the really good news. But we need to put in the effort. It's not like The Secret. It's not a question of just wishing. Click your heels together 3 times and say, there's no place like home. You know, we've got to, sorry, that was a cultural reference. Everybody knows Dorothy. So, like that, you know, we put the effort in and do the purification practices, and we will see a change in our lives. You know, and that's the point of Buddhism. Like I said, it's not sort of like, oh, we're miserable and pathetic, and then one day, boom, we're enlightened. You really do notice your life changing gradually. It's sort of like one increment at a time. Things just get sweeter and sweeter and more positive when you really put your energy into your purification practice. It's not like all of a sudden everything's smooth sailing and you're never going to get a flat tire ever again. But you just see a shift in sort of the general tone, I think, over time of your life. So questions about purification practices? Anything? Yes?
Since you mentioned meditation on emptiness, I know it's premature, but maybe you could give us like a brief overview of what you mean by emptiness.
That's going to be the subject of almost all of tomorrow.
All tomorrow.
Yeah, that's the focus of tomorrow. We're going to start out talking about the 12 links. We're going to relate the 12 links to karma. Then we're going to talk about emptiness and then relate emptiness to the 12 links. So we're going to be looking at the 12 links, both from the perspective of karma and emptiness, and see how we can practice, you know, in our daily lives with both of those aspects. So yeah, we'll save that. If that's okay, we save that for tomorrow. Yes?
I just, more comment just about my understanding of purification is that the intent is very important when you set it up.
Yeah.
Like the intensity of your regret and the intensity of
That's right. Yeah, the more powerfully we're doing all 4 of these. So for example, my friend who does the pit bull rescue thing, right? That's the action itself is saving the dog, but it wouldn't be a complete purification if he didn't do all 4 things. So he gets the phone call. I was at his house once, and he got a phone call because he's in all these lists and hotlines and all of this business. So this thing happens that young dogs are used as practice and bait for fighting dogs. So this dog had been found in a vacant lot. She wasn't even a year old, completely torn to shreds because they had used her as a practice, you know, to train these fighting dogs. He's on the phone. She's going to require $2,000 worth of surgery to save her life. He just immediately said yes. Take her to the vet. I'll come and pick her up tomorrow. I'll pay the money. You know, whoever it was that called him knew him, so did this thing. So then he went, you know, he did that, saving her life, but then he sat down and did all of the other 4. You know, sat down and meditated and said, I want this to be an antidote to my Israeli army killing karma, you know, focused specifically his intention. I mean, on the phone, he didn't say, I'll call you back in 5 minutes after I've done the remedy and the reliance. He just said yes, but then he immediately did that. And then the, you know, the restraint he does all the time of like, I will not, you know, he has this thing too of, he goes, you know, because Lama Zopa has come to his place and blessed his dogs many times. And so he has this thing, and Lama Zopa always says, it's not enough to save the animal's life, then give the animal imprints. Like, for heaven's sake. You know, because otherwise they're just going to die and be reborn as who knows what. So he has this whole thing. He has this strategy, and he'll feed the dogs one by one. Before the dogs are allowed to eat, they have to listen to the Golden Light Sutra. He says certain mantras. He's like, this one's stupid. It needs Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom mantra, before it eats. And so he does this whole trip. He has all of these holy objects all around the dog kennels and pens. You know, he's really serious about, you know, doing the full-on thing and giving them imprints, because otherwise they'll just die as a geriatric pit bull, which is probably rare, you know, mostly. and like no benefit at all, right? But he definitely, so you're absolutely right. Whatever thing we do, if you're going to volunteer at the Conflict Resolution Center as an antidote to your divisive speech karma, before you go to your shift, sit down, generate regret, have that intention, may that volunteer work be the antidote to my divisive speech karma, take refuge, generate bodhicitta, do the whole thing, Especially, it's easy to do with the practices because it's sort of built into the practice. The prostration to the 35 Buddhas, all 4 powers is built into the thing you read. The Vajrasattva practice is all in there. But we need to be careful we do it with the other. Don't just like launch in and do the thing. That's only one of the 4 powers. Yeah, good point. So it's good to be as focused and deliberate as possible, and then it makes the purification as powerful as possible. Yeah.
How do these 6 practices purify negative karma?
Well, all of them actually we're doing a visualization where we're things like meditating on emptiness, the more wisdom we develop, it takes the energy out of that negative karma because we're combating the root ignorance. A lot of the other practices, like the other visualizations, the things like the practice of the 35 Buddhas, we're actually visualizing purifying light rays going in. We're visualizing our negativities getting flushed out. And so it's easy to kind of think, oh, it's just like make-believe, it's just a visualization. Our mind is creating our karma, and our mind creates our purification too, right? And even just in a secular way, people have done studies, where people with a tumor visualize the tumor shrinking, and the next time they go in for their MRI, the tumor shrunk, So in Buddhism, we say the mind is incredibly powerful. So we're doing these practices in conjunction with the 4 powers, with that strong intention, with a lot of those visualizations. The karma is mental, and the power of that antidote is mental as well. Yeah. So very, very powerful. We shouldn't shortchange things like visualization. It's easy to get into this. I am a recovering scientific materialist, and it's very easy to get into this thing of like, oh, it's not, we don't know how these things work and we can't measure it and all this stuff. All I have to think of is at Cambridge University, and I think it was 1911, they were going to close down the physics department because they figured they knew everything there was to know about physics. So let's close down the physics department. Then along comes Einstein, Max Planck, all of the, this whole other paradigm. So to say that what we know and understand is limited to what we can measure with scientific instruments in 2015 is just hubris. It's ridiculous, right? So we need to have some faith in these practices because our all of our experience is created by mind. In fact, Lord Buddha, many sutras, he says, the whole, in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Master Shantideva says, what do you think? Acme Hell Realm Construction Company created the Hell Realm you're experiencing? It was created by your mind. It doesn't exist as something out there. It is an experience created by your mind. So that's a big emphasis in Buddhism. So our antidotes are mental as well, right? So that's why a strong intention is really important in really going through all 4 powers with our purification. Yeah. Anything else? Yes?
I'm just wondering how self-blame creates negative karma.
Say more about what you mean about self-blame creating negative karma.
If we spend a lot of our time criticizing ourselves, so I guess that's the answer, we're engaging in criticism.
Yeah. Our object is ourself. Right? So it's kind of a harsh speech karma towards ourselves as the object. We can be the object of a lot of those karmic actions, I think, actually. We have to think of them one by one. It's interesting. Suicide is considered a negativity in Buddhism, even though it's not considered to be a complete killing karma, because you don't die, you don't experience the completion of the object dying before you, because you are the object and the agent. So there's this weird little technicality in there. But a lot of those negativities, so I think that would be an example of a harsh, we could experience harsh speech karmic results as definitely a result of harsh self-criticism, for sure, really out of proportion. And that's why I say it's really important not to confuse this with guilt. I was teaching a class in India many years ago. It was this big international group of like 60 students from all over the world. And there was this guy who we've become really good friends. We're still in contact. He was this Brazilian mountain climber. He'd done the 7 summits, like the highest mountains in all the continents. And he's a tour guide and leads everyone up to Everest all the time and K2 and all this stuff. So anyway, he's sitting in the front row, and I'm talking about the difference between guilt and regret. And I said, my understanding is in the Buddhist scriptural languages like Sanskrit and Tibetan and Pali, there isn't a word that completely corresponds to the idea of guilt. And he raises his hands. He's like, I don't believe it. I don't believe there's anybody who doesn't have guilt. Like, how can that be true? So we got into this interesting discussion because there were 5 people there from different Asian countries. There was a man from Bhutan, a woman from Korea, a woman from Thailand, a woman from India, a woman from Nepal. So we get into this whole discussion of like the Asian sort of view and the Western view of, and so we boiled it down to when you've done something that hurt someone else, how do you feel, right? All the Western people are like, guilty, And it was interesting, the Korean woman, who hardly spoke English at all, she goes, no. When I've done something wrong that hurt someone else, I feel like inside I'm really Buddha, and I just made a mistake. And the Brazilian guy's like, you do? Wow, what does that feel like? So I think it's important, and I think it's something culturally that, like, a lot of people who grow up in, like, a Judeo-Christian, milieu, whether you grow up religious or not, we have this idea of original sin. And it soaks in. I mean, I wasn't raised religious at all, but it's just sort of an idea out there, and we can often kind of distort and get into this really harsh self-blame, and it really blocks our spiritual progress. We have to think, in Buddhism we say, we have this Buddha nature. And that's our true nature. It's not this born in sin, original sin. That's our true nature. It really is, this incredible potential for enlightenment that's just temporarily obscured by ignorance and delusion and the other afflictive emotions. And that's a whole different flavor. Like that Korean woman said, inside I'm really a Buddha and I made a mistake, I messed up. So that often leads to things like this really quite harsh self-judgment. So I think we have to be careful about that.
I took criticism. I had a lot of criticism put on me as I was growing up.
Yeah.
And so I took that as I can't do anything right. And so when I go to purify at night, because I know I must have done something during the day, right? Even though nothing is like in my face.
Yeah.
And I start thinking through things. It's not clear to me what I should be taking on as something to regret.
Right.
Because I'm not wanting to do anything to make a mistake, so I'm very careful. So I'm not sure how to resolve that to actually, I can look at the examples, I can look at the Bodhisattva vows and that sort of thing. But aside from that, there's a little confusion there about what I'm regretting.
Well, I think it's really helpful. I did practice for many years, and I really want to get back into it, of actually carrying around a little notebook and keeping track throughout the day, so that for your evening purification practice, it's really focused on what you did that day. And what I've done is selected kind of a few of the different sort of ethical guidelines that I'm working on to focus on for that day. So one of the 10 non-virtues, a root bodhisattva vow, a second bodhisattva vow, maybe one of the, Lojong thought training, stanzas. And then you can really, and then every couple of hours, pull out your notebook and check your mind. How am I doing? And have I done anything against my ethics in the last hour or two? Because otherwise, like you say, it's the end of the day, you're exhausted, you're getting ready to do your Vajrasattva. You can't even remember what you ate for lunch, much less what your non-virtues. I found the notebook thing a super, super helpful, really, really helpful practice. Because we say for our purification, the more it really nails what we've actually done, the sooner after having done it, the more powerful that purification is. So yeah, that notebook thing, I would do it 6 times a day, and I would sort of cue it to things that I would do, like as part of my routine, like before a meal. Whip out the notebook, check your mind the last couple of hours, your mid-morning tea break. And I'd get into the habit of doing that, and I found it very, very helpful. And then it wasn't this vague thing of, oh, I'm just a bad person. I know I am. Okay, Vajrasattva. It was like really specific.
When we talk about killing, stealing, and all, and divisive speech and all of that, I say to myself, okay, in the last whatever, I didn't do that, but my mind was critical, or my mind was nice. And so I get confused about, I don't want to have had that thought. So is that?
I think we go to even the low level, anything even peripheral. Sometimes I talk about concentric circles, right? And in the middle would be killing. Another circle would be any kind of harm. Another concentric circle is a thought of harm. Another circle is criticizing and dismissing anyone. So I think it's useful with some of the ones, because it's too easy to go, oh, I never kill, I don't have to worry about that one. Yeah, really thinking about anything that even comes near.
Is that I would then think, I had this critical thought of my husband or whoever, and I want to stop doing that, and these are the things that I could do, or this is the thought I could have instead.
Exactly. Anytime even you have a critical thought, even if you don't say anything harsh or critical, try and think of something positive about that person as that antidote. And I think that's the way over time we work at a subtler and subtler level with our morality, because hopefully as we practice it will get subtler, but there's still work to be done. It's not like we can say, okay, I'm done, right? We just might be a little more peripheral in terms of the concentric circle. Like the bullseye is the 10 non-virtue, right? But the circles kind of leading to that, we're working at a more peripheral level. Yeah. Did you have something, Matt?
I'm worried that Karen, no.
Karen?
Yeah, she might be having critical thoughts about herself, which is different, and because I had those for a long time, and I thought, oh, it's helping me to be a better person to be critical about, but that's not, I don't think.
Yeah. I think you can be mindful and aware without being harsh and critical. There's a dividing line. I think self-honesty and self-examination, obviously really useful, but getting down on ourselves can just be discouraging. It's just too discouraging. Yeah. Yeah, it's excellent.
Did you do your Arizona retreat at Diamond Mountain?
I did. Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, what I'll do tomorrow, maybe, I can draw a diagram of how I did that checking thing, and then we can look at that a little bit, because like I said,
I've been doing that practice for 10 years.
isn't it unbelievable? Yeah. So beneficial. You become so aware of your mind, because it's all about awareness and mindfulness. So yeah, really beautiful. Yes, Lisa.
I want you to speak on the karmic imprint that one has with them during the time of death, or the process of dying, and that another person that's interconnected to this being has a relationship to that person, and how they can provide compassion for that person to help them move on.
Exactly. And we say actually that, the energy around the dying person is a really strong condition too, right? It's not only that person's state of mind, because sometimes the person won't be conscious. We won't be able to guide that person into a certain compassionate state of mind. Maybe they're in a coma or whatever. We say, especially people with a strong karmic connection to the dying person, if they can create an energy of peacefulness and compassion around that person, they can be the condition that will enable that person's virtuous karma to ripen. That's also why we say, and we have a practice after someone has died for up to 49 days, we say that they can be in, the Tibetan word is the bardo, or the intermediate state between rebirths. And we say practices that are done, especially by people very close to that person, can still influence their rebirth. Even after that person has died, before they've taken another rebirth. Well, we say that it can be in 7-day increments up to 7 times 7, so up to 49. So you don't always know, have they taken rebirth or not? But the closer to the moment of death that you do extensive practices, because they say that being, because of their karmic connection with their family and their friends, can actually be there. People feel a presence. In Buddhism, we say that's for real. They have this subtle energy body that they say is usually hanging around, right? The people that they were close to in that past life, especially right after they died. So even after the moment of death, we can do things that will influence how that rebirth will go, So there's a lot of practices that are recommended that can create the conditions. Now, it depends. Does that person have the karma or not? Because in Buddhism, we say we can never actually change someone else's karma. We can just influence the conditions. We can't purify someone else's karma. We can't give somebody else a karmic imprint. But if we have a close connection, our influences on that person will be stronger, as a condition, not as a cause, not as a karmic seed. I can't transfer my karma to anybody else's mind stream. It doesn't work like that. But the closer the relationship, there's more of an influence on the condition. Does that help answer what you were wondering about? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
I don't know yet.
That's kind of the explanation. Yeah, that's kind of the explanation in Buddhism of how that works. Yeah.
So does that mean then, so her dog, right? I mean, people around her dog's death made those practices and created it was going to go to a dog anyway, but, created the conditions to be reborn as that dog, so that she would take, is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying it can influence the actual rebirth, it can influence the throwing karma, right? That person's state of mind or the environment, right, around that person, which can be the practices that their friends are doing, can influence what karma is ripening and what rebirth is ripening. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. One more question, then I think we'll stop. Yeah.
The question is personal. 2 years ago, I received a phone call while I was traveling in Arizona. My sister was dying. One of her requests during her lifetime, she trusted me implicitly by the nature of karma. And for some very circumstantial event, I could not be there. But the day before she died, I was washing dishes and I was at the sink and I received this power energy. But till this day, in my heart, it's not about, I don't have guilt not to be able to be there. But I listen very carefully about what you share about the throwing karma. When a person requests you to be there, I'm sorry. I still feel till now, 2 years later, a request. So it's not about guilt. I don't feel that. It's how to move the bodhicitta space that you invoke during these past 2 days. It's as much her leaving me than me leaving her in the physicality. So you, of course, love the person, but you're missing the physicality, shall we say, of the extension. Because it's really not about that and that, because we were, I mean, she was dying in Paris, and I was in Arizona, so obviously the phone call came during the night. So the regret is to communicate with myself first that I'm sorry, I didn't fulfill her request.
But you know what? It's not too late, because you have that karmic connection. Somebody who is your sister in this lifetime, you will run into her for sure again. You know, when I was in this long retreat in a yurt in the middle of the desert in Arizona, getting bitten by rattlesnakes, right, at 120-degree heat, there were people in my life I was very close to that had died, and I felt like at the time that they passed away, I couldn't help them much. You know, I was much younger, I didn't know anything about Buddhism. I basically felt like I didn't do anything. In fact, one person, I probably made it worse, just because of my reaction and my immaturity in dealing with it. Those were the ones that kept my rear end in that yurt practicing, because I had faith that because of that karmic connection, I would still have a chance. And when I was doing my practice, anytime I felt like this is too hard, I'm lonely, I'm off here doing this solitary retreat, I would think of those people and I'd say, I have a connection to them, I have a responsibility. The next time I run into them, I'm going to be ready and I'm going to be able to help them. And that, to me, made all the difference in the world, and it's still motivating. I mean, I say all sentient beings, but that's too vague. It's the ones that I'm connected to, especially the ones I feel like I wasn't there for in a way that I aspired to be, because I really truly feel like I still have an opportunity in the future. You know, so I would just say that to you. Of course, you feel the way you feel, but it can really be a motivation for your spiritual practice, right? To enable yourself to feel ready the next time. You know, because for sure, according to Buddhism, you have that connection.
I think the part that was so tangible from a place of the exercise of regret is she specifically asked me to help her while they give her the morphine.
Right.
To make sure
Yeah.
that she was awake.
Yeah.
And it was really strange because when she died, I was in Arizona, but I was there.
Yeah.
But at that moment of awakening, moment of death, because that's what it is, to live, to die, to live. So that awakened moment of death, of the understanding, that deeper connection of opening my heart to her, but still feeling the influence that you speak about, that we cannot leave the karma of another.
Yeah.
But because in our life, by the nature of our life, we've been going through many wars together.
Right.
So that it feels to me from this whole moment in time that death is the greatest teacher.
Yeah.
That the energy of that moment is a blessing for the one who is staying behind as much as the one. I mean, how many people have the blessing to receive the knowing that you have practiced yourself of being with the dying?
Yeah.
That is enormous gift to not let yourself complacent, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And one of the things, we're limited. We need to forgive ourselves and really keep using it as a motivation for our practice, I think.
The compassion for Karen.
My mother is quite a remarkable woman, and she doesn't speak a lot. But when she does, she does. So I had the privilege to be with her in a nursing home when she's in the Alps. And listening to Karen and listening to any one of our heart at any time on our life. My mother looked at me and she said, she's in a wheelchair, she says, no blame, no judgment. She never said word like that. She said, we make mistake, but we are free. And I've been pondering a lot because we lose our friend. We lose, depending on your karmic seed. Some people are very tight in their family, but you lose people constantly, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, and it's sort of the nature of samsara is. Things don't always work out, we have these regrets, but we have this opportunity to change. And that's why understanding this, we can slowly just move in that direction of, being able to be more aware of our actions and really kind of create the reality that we want. So on that note, let's dedicate all of our amazing virtue, and let's just think, 7.5 billion human beings on this planet. How many of them spent today focusing on learning how to eliminate their suffering, how to benefit all sentient beings? It's really astonishing. When you think of it in that perspective, a tiny 0.000 whatever of all of the human beings on this planet spent all day long, like you all did, in virtue and turning your minds to virtue. So let's think about that and just rejoice. Take a moment to rejoice in all of the positive energy that you've generated today. And let's dedicate all of that positive energy that we might be able to gain a deep understanding of how we create our samsara and how we can become free and thereby bring freedom to all living beings, especially those that we're karmically connected to. That's why we all need to become fully enlightened. It wasn't enough for the historical Buddhist Shakyamuni Buddha, because all those beings that we're connected to karmically are depending on us to lead them to freedom. So let's dedicate all the positive energy towards that goal. So tomorrow we'll begin with looking at the 12 links of dependent origination, relating that to karma. Then we'll segue into the topic of emptiness, circle back around and relate that to the 12 links, and really talk about how to take both karma and emptiness and our understanding of dependent origination into our practice. All of that between 10 and 5 tomorrow. Then we'll just be set. Nothing more to do. Thank you for your attention. I know it's been a long day. You guys did awesome. Thank you.